Good day, everyone. Welcome to our webinar titled Understanding POUR, the Basics of Universal Design for Learning. Let me mention that the webinar will be recorded and you'll automatically get a link to the recording and to the slides as well. Please use the chat window on the upper right of your screen to ask questions of our expert panelists and to respond to our polling questions as well when they come up. It's now my privilege to introduce today's presenters. Let me start with Rachel Bauer. She's the Director and Principal Investigator at ATE Central. Rachel, welcome today. Please introduce yourself a bit more and then your colleague, Louise.
Hi, Mike. Welcome, everybody. We're thrilled to have everybody with us today. I know it's a topic, accessibility and universal design for learning, that's certainly near and dear to our hearts here. We're thrilled to have Luis Perez here with us. Luis, you want to just say hello and introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. I'm pleased to be coming to you this afternoon to present this important topic. I'm a technical assistant specialist at the National Center on Accessible Educational Materials. We just go by the AEM Center, AEM, at CAST. I apologize in advance. I'm a little under the weather, and so my voice is not going to sound as it usually sounds, but we will soldier through, and I thank you all for being with us this afternoon.
I actually think you sound fantastic, Luis, for being under the weather. And I'm going to mention also that we'd hoped Dr. Azar was going to be able to join us. But as you all know, it's a strange time, lots going on for lots of people. So instead, we're going to talk about, we have some slides about the work Dr. Azar is doing with the AIM Center, and Luis will kind of talk us through his slides instead. So I think that will go just fine. But first, we want to ask you a little bit about what your reason is for joining us today. Mike is going to open up a poll, and you can very easily click here. We want to know kind of why you're interested in the topic of accessibility. So maybe you're new to accessibility, want to learn more about the topic, you have students with disabilities. You can see folks are putting in answers already, and you can see those answers coming up. And if you have other, you're welcome to share the other reason in the chat window. And as Mike mentioned, we'd love to get your questions. So any questions you have as we're going through the webinar slides, pop those into chat. You can chat me privately, you can chat everyone, and then I will relay those and make sure that Luis has time to answer those. And if for some reason your answers don't get, your questions don't get answered, we're definitely around, and you can email us too. So Luis, it looks like we've got the highest percentage are folks that are new to accessibility and want more to learn more, but it's fairly even with our three main areas today.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for that feedback. It's great to know where you're coming from.
Somebody else put in hybrid face-to-face labs and other material, online course accessibility assistant, and Nina says her job, their job involves improving accessibility on online courses. So that's wonderful. All right. So I'm just going to remind all of you that this webinar is part of work that we do at AT Central under NSF funding, and the program is ATE stands for Advanced Technological Education. It's a funding stream at the National Science Foundation with a focus on technician education. It is NSF's big commitment to two-year institutions. There's a huge focus on industry involvement also. There are about 300 projects and centers funded most of the time within ATE. And it's a real community. People support each other. There's a lot of kind of baked in support and cross-cutting support for folks that are in the community. The next grants will be due in October if anyone's interested, and we're always looking for for people to apply to ATE to support the work that they're doing in their two-year institutions. Just to tell you a little bit about AT Central, we really work to amplify and support the work of and impact of the ATE program and community. We have an information hub and portal, lots of services and tools that we've created to support the work of grantee, and we have this annual spotlight series. Every year we focus on a different topic of interest to the community. Last year we were focused on branding and messaging, and this year we're looking at accessibility. And so, of course, we're thrilled to be working with CAST and the AEM Center. And I'm going to turn it over to Luis, who's going to talk to you a little bit about the AEM Center mission, and then we're going to be diving into the webinar. I think we have one more poll, but then we'll be diving into the webinar. So I'll turn it over to you, Luis.
Thank you so much, Rachel. So the National AEM Center, our mission is to provide expert technical assistance. We are a technical assistance center that's funded by the Office of Special Education Programs at the U.S. Department of Education. And our mission is twofold. It's to increase the availability and the use of high quality, accessible materials and technologies. And so we work with publishers and developers of educational technology to make sure that they're creating content that is accessible so that it's available for learners. And then on the use side, we work with school districts, we work with the general public to increase awareness of accessibility best practices and make sure that learners are getting the materials they need in a timely basis. So AEM Center, the AEM stands for Accessible Educational Materials. I just saw that question in the chat. We work with a range of stakeholders across the lifespan, ranging from early childhood programs and parent centers, all the way to institutions of higher education and workforce development agencies. And I also want to mention that with us in the chat is Sam Johnston, who is the Director of Post-Secondary and Workforce at CAS. So Sam will also be participating in the chat and answering some of your questions. So thank you, Sam, for being with us today. And the National AEM Center, it's a federally funded technical assistance center, but it is based at CAST. And CAST is an organization that has a mission to bust the barriers to learning that millions of people experience every day. And so you probably know CAST best as the organization that started a universal design for learning movement, which we're going to explore in more detail in just a few slides. But it also continues to do research and development around inclusive learning practices and tools. And so the work of the AEM Center fits quite nicely into the mission of CAS, as we'll explore in just a second.
All right, so we have another little poll for you, just because we like to know who is with us on the webinar. And so we want to hear a little bit about who you are. So are you part of the AT community already? Maybe you are part of an AT project or center. You're thinking about going for AT funding at a non-ATE institution or other. And again, you can share in the chat window with us if you'd like to share. Sometimes we have instructional designers or librarians or other folks joining us. Right. So lots of people from ATE and some people who are not part of ATE. You got an instructional designer, look at that. And folks up, there's a chair of a department. Sharon, just type that in. All right, well, thanks, folks. So we have a nice mix today of folks from the community and folks from other educational institutions and others from outside ATE. All right. So I think Luis is going to go through objectives right now, and then we're going to dive in.
Absolutely. So our objectives for this webinar this afternoon are threefold. First, we want to explain what is meant by accessible, because that's a word that's thrown around a lot, but we want to make sure we're all starting from a common term, and also look at how accessibility fits into the Universal Design for Learning framework. We'll then look at the application of the 4 POUR principles. So those are 4 principles for designing accessible learning experiences. And we'll look at POUR in the context of a robotics curriculum. That's the curriculum that Dr. Azar, who was hoping would be able to join us today, has been working on. And then finally, we want to share with you some AIM Center resources so that you can further your learning about accessible educational materials and just accessibility in general following this webinar. So we'll just go ahead and get started with a quick question for you, and we'll use the chat to answer. But I just want to get a sense of how you understand accessibility as a concept. So go ahead and type into the chat if you heard the word accessibility, or if you had to provide a one-sentence summary, what would that be? And while you do that, I have a puppy here with me who is whining because his mom went out for a second. So I'm going to let him into the room so that he stops whining so that you don't hear that in the background.
Well, I think if we could just be watching the puppy, that might make all of our stress go way down. So I'm a big fan of puppies in any form. Okay, we got some answers here about this sort of definition of accessibility. Mike was saying that he thinks of it as web accessibility. Kenneth said technology limitations. Amy said equality of use for all stakeholders in regards to any presentations or materials. Lots of really good contributions here. Madeline said, hi Madeline. Madeline said making content available to all potential users, all people able to utilize teaching materials and information, improving the independence and mobility of people with disabilities through the use of adaptive technology and accommodations. Marcia said multiple methods of delivery of content for everyone, which is great too.
Great. I've been listening to all of these answers. These are all great.
There are lots of really good answers in here, yeah.
Great.
Accessibility ensures that materials are usable by all.
And that's a really key one. Is I meant somebody posted making sure that they're available to all potential users, and we definitely want to make sure that they're available, but we want to make sure that they're more than just available, but that they're actually usable to support learning for everyone. So going that extra step and making sure that we're creating an accessible, usable learning experience, that's really the goal. So I'm going to share with you all one definition that we use as sort of our North Star in the work that we do at the AIM Center. This is a functional definition of accessibility, and it comes to us from the Office for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education. And according to this definition, accessibility is when a person with a disability can do three things. They can acquire the same information, they can engage in the same interactions, and they can enjoy the same services as a person without a disability. And they can do that in an equally effective and equally integrated manner and with substantially equivalent ease of use. So again, that key word or that key phrase there is equivalent ease of use, meaning that they're getting access to the information at the same time as individuals who don't have disabilities. So really, a big part of it is making sure that the information is not just available, that it's actually usable to support learning. And so how does the accessibility concept fit into universal design for learning? So before I look at that, I want to make sure that I define universal design for learning, just in case you're new to this concept. So universal design for learning is a framework that's based into scientific insights into how humans learn. And the goal is to optimize instruction to make sure that every person can become an expert learner. So one of the common misconceptions about universal design for learning is that it's just for students with special needs or students with disabilities. And that's actually the opposite. Universal design for learning is for everyone, because the goal is to optimize learning so that everyone can reach their potential. So universal design for learning really begins with the assumption that all learners vary. And they vary in three unique ways. They vary how they're engaged. So what motivates them, what hooks them into learning varies from one learner to another. They vary in how they can take in information. So some learners may prefer to listen, some learners may prefer to read. So we need to provide the information in a variety of modalities to accommodate the different ways in which learners engage with the information and perceive it. And then they also vary how they're able to show their understanding. Some of them may prefer to write. Some of them may prefer to record their voice, or they may need to do that because they may have a number of challenges that make it difficult to write. And so providing another option can be helpful. So that's a starting point for Universal Design for Learning, is that there is a great deal of learner variability. And the best way to address that variability is to provide a flexible curriculum with lots of choices for how learners are engaged, how the information is represented, and how learners are able to respond and interact with the learning environment. And accessibility is really foundational to Universal Design for Learning. It's like the welcome mat of Universal Design for Learning. Before we get into the building, we need to have that nice welcoming environment that lets everybody in and participate. So I love to share this quote that comes from the Universal Design for Learning guidelines that are posted at CAST. And the quote is that the purpose of education is not just to make information accessible, but rather to teach learners how to take that information and transform it into usable knowledge. So again, accessibility is just the start. It's essential, but not sufficient. It's a starting point for the learning experience. But we need to do more than just make information accessible. We need to provide supports that allow learners to take that information and then do something meaningful with it. And I love to share this graphic because it really shows where accessibility fits into the UDL curriculum framework. And so we divide the UDL guidelines, and these guidelines are posted on the CAST website. They're really a blueprint for designing the curriculum or for revising the curriculum. So you can use it as a study tool to evaluate your curriculum. But it's really divided into 3 different layers. And the first layer is the one that we're going to focusing on today. That's the access layer. And the goal there is to universally design our materials and our tools to make sure that that welcome mat is there for learners, so that make sure that they can interact with the learning environment from the start. But we need to go beyond that, and then there's a build layer that focuses on making learning meaningful and building learning skills around communication, and the social components of learning also come into play here. And how we allow people to participate in a community of learning is important. And then the final layer is the internalizing layer. And the goal here is to build interdependence. So I would actually update this slide because it's more than independence, it's interdependence. And how we give learners the skills that they need to be interdependent and to be able to work independently, but also as part of a community. So again, I encourage you all to check out the UDL guidelines. They're available on the CAST website, and we'll see if we can drop that link in the chat in just a little bit. So the access layer, as I said, that's what we're going to be focusing on in terms of that first layer of Universal Design for Learning that really sets the foundation for the learning experience. And a big part of that access layer is making sure that the materials and technologies that we use are accessible. So they're available and usable by everyone, or as many people as possible. And there are standards and guidelines for how to do that, but they can be somewhat confusing because they were developed for a technical audience. And so one of the things that we've done at the AEM Center is we've taken those guidelines and really focus on the core principles. And there are actually 4 core principles of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which are the international standard for accessibility. That international standard is then the foundation for many national laws related to accessibility. So for instance, in the United States, we have Section 508, which is the accessibility law for the federal government. And so that law is based on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and these 4 principles. So the 4 principles that make up the acronym POUR, P-O-U-R, are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So we want to make sure that people can take in the information in a variety of different ways. That's the perceivable principle. We want to make sure that they can interact with their devices or the technology or the learning management system in a variety of different ways. That's the operable principle. We want to make sure that the technology and the content is understandable meaning that it is intuitive, it's easy to learn, and it's easy to use. And then robust, we want to make sure that the content and the technology works across a range of different platforms. And a big part of that is making sure that the content is responsive and will work not just on a desktop, or it will also work on a mobile device. And this last principle has become really important in the last few days because, as you know, people are working from home. There are multiple people, in many cases, working from home. And so it's not always possible to use a computer. People are using their tablets, they're using their mobile phones. And so it's become really important to make sure that technology and content works across platforms and different devices. Really important at this time. I also want to remind you, before we dive into the POUR principles in more detail, just a reminder that we have many resources on the National AEM Center website that you can tap into, including an entire section on POUR, where we've compiled a number of different tutorials and resources. All of the videos are closed captioned to model that accessibility. And we've really tried our best to take the guidelines and really put them into plain language so that they're easier to understand for the practitioner who wants to implement them right away. And then also, although I don't have a slide for this, I'm sure Sam will drop the link in the chat. We have a sister website, UDL on Campus, and that looks at accessibility specifically within the context of higher education. So that will be really, really helpful for you. It has a section on the syllabus, so thinking about how do we make the syllabus accessible, because that's going to be one of the first experiences that a learner will have with your course. And so we want to make sure from the start that we set expectations about the supports that we'll offer, but also expectations about what the experience will be like in terms of accessibility. So thank you, Sam, for dropping that into the chat. The link is udloncampus.cas.org. So that is a great resource for you to check out, in addition to the resources that we have on the AEM Center website. So before we look at the technical aspects of accessibility that we'll be addressing today, I want to start with this quote from Maya Angelou that I always share during my presentations, because I think it's important to set the tone. And the quote from Maya Angelou is, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better." And that is a quote that I live by in my work. There's another saying that I've heard from a number of people, that perfect is the enemy of good. And so you don't have to get all of this all at once, especially in the current environment that we're in, where people are somewhat overwhelmed. So I want to acknowledge that you may be feeling overwhelmed by the number of resources, the number of tools, the number of websites that are coming your way right now. And so, you know, you may need to prioritize and just take it slow. Take one practice at a time. And then once you feel comfortable that you've got that practice under your belt, then move on to the next one. So you don't have to master this all at once. This is a growth opportunity that we all have to become better educators and to develop content that, again, creates a more equitable and inclusive learning experience. But that's not going to happen overnight. That's going to be a process. So I want you to just keep this in mind, that the goal here is continuous improvement rather than getting things perfect right off the bat, especially in the circumstances that we find ourselves in right now. So we want to talk, it looks like Dr. Azar has joined us in the chat. So I'm going to turn it over to him, and he's going to introduce this section here. But we're going to focus on 5 practices for improving accessibility in a lesson plan that I work with Dr. Azar on. So Dr. Azar, are you on?
You guys hear me? Hi, Luis. Hi, everybody.
Can you
guys hear me?
We can hear you, Dr. Azar.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. This looks like a very excellent turnout. I work at the City University of New York. I met Sam and Luis in a conference last year, an ATE conference, and I was really moved by their presentation, and I thought that I should do something about it. So I came back and I set up a meeting with Luis, and I cannot tell everybody how awesome Luis is. We set up a meeting, and we figure out what curriculum we're gonna use to make things accessible. So I do a lot of robotics curriculum for after school, high school robotics, and then also in a classroom. So for outreach I do from my university to get more students from minority and low-income student into computing and robotics in general. So this was those curriculum basically was already made. So our goal was to take this curriculum and make them accessible. So and we use a Lego robot for EV3 and various programming language like visual programming and Python and Robot C. So we started with the curriculum, which with the Lego EV3, and so I had several students of mine who are working with me as a peer mentor. So we had a training with Luis, and he taught us what are the different things we should follow and all the different criteria we should follow up that we're going to discuss in a bit. And after that, we select one of the lesson plan. And what Luis did was Luis kind of went over and kind of give us comment on them on different section. I think he's gonna show you guys all what we worked on, and then my student work on those problem in different lesson plan. And the things we looked at is that those 5 things we have in the slide. We have to make sure that we mark up the document with styles. We need to make sure the use of the table headers. We have to create real lists and create descriptive hyperlinks. And that becomes really tricky because the things we have with the Lego robots, we have to make sure that we give the right description. And the last one, and also the most important one, is the alternative text for the images. So, we have to also have descriptive images on the icons. And so that's what we worked on. And we did several lesson plan, and as we do lesson plan, Luis goes over and review it and give us more feedback, and it was an iterative process. And at the end, we had I think 5 or 6 lesson plan already completed. And so that's where we stand right now, and I'm so glad to share this with all of you guys. This happened, and the process. I think any of us can start working on this problem and get headway. And Sam and Rachel and Luis and Janet, they've been awesome supporting this thing. And as I said, I cannot say more things about Luis, that how wonderful he was to make this far. And I'm looking forward to collaborating with them in the future. So Luis, you want to take over from here?
Thank you so much, Dr. Asar, for that overview. And what's really great about the work we've done together is that this is helping the students develop their skills. So it's not just you, Dr. Azar, it's also the students that are going to take these skills with them and really improve the work that they do going forward. So it's a great experience. So thank you so much for allowing us to work with you on this project. And we actually would love to hear from a number of you. We are creating some UDL case studies similar to the work that we've done with Dr. Asar. So feel free to contact us. Sam will share her email in the chat, I'm sure, at some point. And we look forward to hearing from you and how we can work together on this process of creating additional case studies that will benefit the community. All right, so as Dr. Asar mentioned, we really tried to prioritize and focus on these 5 high leverage practices because these were things that kept coming up as I reviewed the lesson plans that were being submitted. And so the first one is really making sure that the documents that are being shared have a good structure to them. I liken this to when you are building a house, you want to make sure that the framing and the foundation are really solid from the start. And then you can make it look pretty by changing the paint, changing the texture of the walls and so on. But that foundation is really important. And so with the document, we do that through the use of markup, making sure that we split the content into different sections because it's helpful for learners to not have to read a wall of text, what I call a wall of text. So we want to split the content into some more manageable chunks. And the way that we do that is by using section headings. But a lot of times people just create a section heading by selecting the text and then just going to the toolbar in their authoring program and selecting bold and large, right, larger text. Now that makes it look like a section heading, but it doesn't actually function like one for users of assistive technology. So we want to make sure as much as possible that we're using the correct styles to indicate section headings, and that those section headings are both descriptive and unique, so that they explain what that section of text that's following the heading is all about, and that they're not all, they don't all have the same text, but they're actually descriptive and unique. So in most authoring applications, there will be a section where you can select different styles. In Microsoft Office products, that's in the Home tab. There'll be a Styles pane where you can select from normal text, which will be a paragraph, to heading 1 for the most important section heading, heading level 2 for subsections, and so on. So again, it's just important to make sure that we are not just changing the appearance of the section heading, but also assigning a style to it so that it's marked up correctly to indicate that it is a section heading in terms of functionality. So there's 3 advantages to using styles for our section headings. Probably the biggest one is that they provide in-page navigation for screen reader users. I'm a screen reader user myself, and whenever I get to a website that I want to read, I don't actually read the entire website from beginning to end. What I actually do, once I hear what website I'm on, I will press a keyboard shortcut on my screen reader, and it will bring up a list of the headings on that page. I can then sort of skim those headings, if you will, by using another keyboard shortcut, which is just the arrow keys. And that will let me know, what the structure of that web page is. I can get a sense of how the information is organized. And when I get to the section that I want to read, then I'll just press enter and I'll start reading from that point on. So having properly marked up section headings really improves the experience for screen reader users by providing that in-page navigation. And then for other learners, they're really helpful because we can use the section headings to create a table of contents at the beginning of the document. And that, again, reveals the structure of the information. It lets learners know how things are organized by providing an outline of the content. And for designers, the last benefit is that it ensures consistency, because instead of having to change every section heading that's marked up as an H2 individually, we can just change the H2 style in one place, and then those changes will cascade throughout our document. So that's going to create a more consistent look and feel to the document. So it can really help to create a better experience through consistency. So in addition to using the proper markup, so again, in your authoring tool, there may be a pane or there may be a pull-down menu, depends on the authoring tool you're using, but you'll want to select the appropriate heading style from that menu or pane. You also want to make sure that you're building a logical outline of the content. So this is the example that I have here in the middle of the screen is coming from lesson 1 of Dr. Asar's lessons. So here the title of that lesson is Intro to Hardware Construction and Software Programming. And so we've made that into a heading level 1 or H1 because that's the most important thing. We want to make sure that a screen reader user knows right away what content they're on. And then within that lesson plan, there's different sections there's one for vocabulary and terms. There's one that provides background knowledge on what is a robot. There's one on hardware, and there's one on software. So those are the major sections of this lesson plan. And so we've marked those up as heading level 2, indicating that they're indented in the outline. They're a level below the main title here. And then within some of these sections, there are subsections that go into more detail about the topic. And so, for instance, for introduction, what is a robot, for that section, we have 2 subsections, one on why use robots, and then one that provides examples of where robots are used in society. And so I've marked those up as heading level 3, meaning that they're indented in the outline. They're one level below the section headings. They're subsection headings, if you will. So the important thing is to make sure that we're creating a logical structure with how we use our headings, so that, again, learners can derive this outline either through the table of contents, or if you're a user of assistive technology, by using the features built into your assistive technology for navigation. And so here's an example. There's an easy way to check your work. In Microsoft Office products, there's a feature called the navigation pane, and that is found under your view options. And so you can turn on the navigation pane, and what it will do is that it will show you an outline of the content. And so that simulates what a screen reader user will see when they, or hear when they press their keyboard shortcut for getting a list of the headings. Or the other thing you can do is add a table of contents. So most authoring tools have this option. In Microsoft Word product, it's available under the References tab. So there you can add a table of contents just to check that your document structure actually makes sense. Google Docs also has the same option. You can add a table of contents at the beginning, and again, that helps with understanding. It also helps with navigation. So let me pause there. I've thrown a lot at you, so I want to pause for a second and see if there's a couple of questions that we can take around document structure and the use of headings. I see a few of you are typing, so I will give you a chance. I don't have any music, and you definitely don't want me to sing while I have a cold. So I will just look in the chat. So there is a question about the recording of the presentation. Absolutely. There will be, it is being recorded, and you'll get information about that.
Danette asked you, do you have any tips for using these tools?
Rather than getting into these specific tools and how to do it,
Office 365 web
our
file,
content on the AEM Center website,
we'll
share that again in just a bit, the Designing for Accessibility with Poor. We have tutorials for each different authoring tool. Because again, the steps are very similar, but there will be differences in terms of terminology, depending on whether you're using Microsoft Office or Google Docs, or even another tool for actually doing the, setting the heading styles and creating that table of contents. So that would be my best advice, is to visit that page and then look at the specific tutorials.
And Tina asked us if someone does get an AT grant, are there certain requirements for degrees of accessibility? In other words, what must somebody who has an AT grant do? Tina, I don't believe that NSF spells out specifically a certain degree of accessibility, because I don't think one would think of. I think Luis would agree that it's an ongoing process making things accessible. But when you have federal dollars, there is an expectation, as there are in most educational institutions, that you will be working on
the requirement for
the materials
you create for federal
accessible.
Agencies, but a lot of
I don't know if anyone wants
wherever
to
you're
jump
getting
in on
federal
that.
dollars, that's something that you need to know about. And of course, we don't have enough time to go into that complex topic of Section 508. But Section 508 is currently based or incorporates the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines in a recent refresh. So that is, a lot of what we're going to cover here. It will give you a head start on, moving towards Section 508 compliance, if you will. I see a couple of other questions. One was about changing the default font color and size of the preset styles. And absolutely, you can do that. If you're looking at your styles pane, you can right-click or perform an alternate click on any of the styles, and you can choose modify and then just change your default styles. But it will only be for that document. There is a way to change the template that you use, but that's a little bit more advanced, and I don't want to get you in trouble by overwriting your default Word template. But definitely you can change it at least for that document so that each time you assign a heading level 2, it will have that consistent appearance and look and feel. And then someone asked about LMSs as well. Absolutely. These concepts cut across different tools. So if your LMS has an editing environment where you would normally enter content, then most likely there will be an option for choosing different heading levels from that interface. We will get into that. So let me hold
Crystal
on to that.
also asked us
and
about
then, we'll
graphics and
in
infographics.
second, if that's okay.
What's the best practice in terms of sharing information when it's paired with a graphic?
Great questions, everybody. Keep those coming. So the next one is the next high-level practice here. So we looked at creating a good document structure
Let's move right along
using
then.
styles to create functional section headings. The next one is sort of related, and it's the use of table headers. So the table headers for the rows and the columns in a table really help out screen readers by describing each value in a table. So typically, as a sighted person, you can look at this table and you can sort of scan it, and you can associate each cell, right, the value of that cell with its corresponding header. So for instance, if I look at gyro sensor, well, I can quickly see that that's a type of sensor or motor, or color sensor. I could right away see. But if you're someone who's visually impaired or who's blind and they're using a screen reader, as they scan through this table, they lose that association unless we create it for them. And so we want to make sure that for each of these values in the table, we associate it with a header. So that way, when the screen reader is navigating, it will say something like sensor motor, gyro sensor, sensor motor, color sensor. So it creates that association between the header and the values in the table. So basically, this is not too difficult to do in Microsoft Word. What you'll do is just select the table, and then you will go to the table design, I believe it is, and then just make sure there's a checkbox next to header row. And what that does is automatically indicates that first row as your header row. It takes care of making that association for you. And so the other thing that I would indicate here, it's really important to stick to simple tables. That means tables where there's an equal number of rows and columns. There are no merged cells, for instance. Those can be really difficult to make accessible for screen readers. So making sure that if you have a really complex table, see if you can split it into 3 or 4 simpler tables so that they're more accessible and usable for screen reader users. And then the last note on this that I want to indicate here is that Google Docs does not have this option for indicating table headers or row or column headers. So that's something to be aware of, and that's something that I hope they will address in a future update, because tables are used quite a bit to share information. And then the third high-level leverage practice here is around creating real lists. So it's important to, when you create a list, to use the bullets and numbering options within your authoring tool. Because screen reader users can benefit from that in terms of usability. So for instance, a screen reader user will indicate that it's come across a list, and then it will indicate how many items are in the list. And it will read each item, and then it will say that it's out of that list. So it can provide a lot of information as long as we create that list properly. So I have an example here from the course. I came across a list similar to this one here. And the list says there are 5 different types of variables you can choose to read from or write to. And then the list was created just by typing a dash. So the first dash reads numeric, holds any numeric value. Second one, logic, holds either a true or false value, and so on. So as far as the screen reader user is concerned, this is just one item. There is no indication here that we're actually listening to a list. What we want to do instead is use our formatting options for bullets and numbering and insert those bullets using that feature of our authoring application, so that then we have proper bullets before each item. And again, that way the screen reader can say, here's a list with 5 items, and then it will say item 1, numeric, holds any numeric value. Item 2, logic, holds either a true or false value, and so on. So again, it just helps with usability to make sure that we format the list correctly. Let me take another pause here. It gives me a chance to take a drink of water because my voice is starting to get a little raspy, and see if you have questions about those 2 items, tables and lists.
We do, I know that we're running, we've got the last 15 minutes here, but I do want to get to a couple of these questions. Danette was asking us a couple of things about screen readers. Do they still
as a screen reader
read
user, I can
all
tab
vertical
through the
items
table,
by
and it
column,
usually starts in
and
the
then
upper
is there a
left,
way to make
and it will just
make
go
them
through
read
the
left
cells
to
in that
right?
order. It really
I don't
depends
know,
on the screen
Luis, if
reader,
you can.
and it also depends on your preferences. So for instance, with some screen readers, you can actually enable the option to have the rows and columns read aloud. So it really depends on the screen reader that you're using. But yes, you can enable that in one of the preferences so that that association takes place. But we want to make sure that we do it properly when we create the table as well for that to work.
I think that's actually our only question.
I am not familiar with that, so that is
Joanne
a good tip.
said, I believe if you have a table
that's something
created
definitely
already
I'll
and
look
then
into, Joanne.
added a row, it reads
and
that row
the other
last.
thing I will mention while we're on the topic of tables is a lot of people try to use tables for design, and they really should only be used for tabular data. So don't use the table just to space things out or to create white space. We really have other options for that rather than using a table. So make sure that you're just using tables for what they were intended, which was to create to represent tabular data, if you will.
Okay.
Yep. Sure. Absolutely.
All right, Luis, there are a couple other questions,
we're
but I think
almost there.
because we're
getting there.
running a little short, we've
So
only got
the
about 10
fourth
minutes, I think
high-level
we'll wait, and if we can get to those at the end, we will, and if not, people can email Luis
we have a
directly, I
demo in
think,
just
isn't
a
that right?
second that I'm going to queue up. So screen reader users, when they get to a link, they will indicate that it is a link. But in some cases, just like with the section headings, they may press the keyboard shortcut to just get a list of all of the links on the page. And so we need to make sure that the links make sense out of context, meaning that they make sense on their own on a list without the rest of the page to provide the context. So here's an example of 2 links. You've probably seen websites or documents where people say, click here for this or learn more. And it's just a click here or learn more part that's made into a link. And so if I were to press the keyboard shortcut on my screen reader, I might get a list similar to this one here, where it's just 2 links and they both say click here. So now the question is, which of these 2 links allows you to download the EV3 software, which is the software that Dr. Azar is using in his course, right? So it's really difficult to determine what's going to happen when you follow that link. Instead, what we can do is select some text that's descriptive and then make that into the hyperlink text. So now if I were to ask you the question, which of these two links takes you to the course website, then you would, or actually the prompt there should have been, which one allows you to download the EV3 software? Then right away you would know which one is the correct link just from the list without needing to have the rest of the page for context. So really important to create descriptive hyperlinks rather than using generic terms like click here or learn more. Besides not being descriptive, there may be people who are not clicking. They may be tapping. They may be using alternative means of access. So important to use terminology that does not indicate that you have to click. All right, so we have another example here. The other practice related to links is making sure that you don't just put out a raw URL. So a raw URL would be just the web address for the website or the web resource that you're sharing. An example of that, this is really common with Google Drive or Google Docs because they have to create these really long URLs or web addresses that have lots of symbols and letters and numbers on them. So Mike, if you could queue up the audio file, we're just going to hear this link as it would be played back to a screen reader user.
https://drive.google.com/file/d/1PCPOZ_YBCH0NHJUTG_DD661WSEG3ITA/view question USP=sharing.
Okay, so what do you think? Is that descriptive? Is that helpful? So what we want to do is, again, making sure that we hide that raw URL behind more descriptive text. So in this case, the link text that I've used for that document is Lesson 1, Intro to Hardware Construction and Software Programming. Again, we're creating that expectation of what's going to happen when we follow that link. And then the last high leverage practice that we're going to discuss here is alternative text for images. So again, screen reader users don't, even though screen readers now are using artificial intelligence to try to describe images, they're not quite there in terms of accuracy yet. So we want to make sure that whenever we use an image, we actually provide what's called alternative text, which is just a concise description of the key information that that image conveys. So the way that I try to explain it to people, it's like if you were describing the image to someone over the telephone. What important information would you want them to take away from that image? And so there are ways to do that in a number of authoring applications. It's as simple in Microsoft Word. I use Office 365. So in Microsoft Word, you can right-click the image, choose Edit All Text, and then you'll either enter your description manually, or if that image is just there for decoration, Office 365 now includes an option where you can make it decorative so that a screen reader can skip it. Because that image may not add meaning to the content, and so it's just there for decoration. We want to make sure that it's skipped. If we don't mark it as decorative, it's possible that the screen reader will read the file name, which may not be that descriptive. And there are other ways to do it. If you have an older version of Microsoft Office, you'll notice in older versions there were two different areas where you could put in a title and a description. The only thing we want to make sure is that we put in the alternative text in the description field and avoid the title field. And the reason for that is that if you were to transfer the Microsoft Word document to another format like PDF, it's only the description field that gets transferred. So we want to make sure that we only use that description field for our alternative text. And again, these steps are detailed in step-by-step directions on our website with the resources that we have available. So the basic guidelines, I do want to leave you with not just the how, but some basic guidelines. The first one is to really understand what the purpose of the image is. Because that's going to determine what the alternative text will be, how it's used in context. The second is to really start with a broad overview and then zero in on the relevant details, which is the third point here. So again, we go from general to more specific, and then always keep in mind what's the context of the use for the image. And I always tell people this is more an art than a science. So there is no perfect alternative text. There's just better alternative text based on the context. The other thing I would recommend too is, if it's possible, to do it in a collaborative way. That's what we did on the AIM Center website when we had our icons for poor. So when you visit the poor section of our website, you're going to see these great icons. And we did that as an exercise for our team. We actually had people collaborate on developing the alternative text, because different people will come up with different alternative texts. So it's just a matter of collaborating and seeing, what's the best option given the context and the purpose. And then finally, the last thing I would say on alternative text is it's really important for collaboration to occur between subject matter experts and technical experts. Because I may know how to put in the alternative text, and this actually came up in Dr. Azar's course, but I am not an expert in robotics, right? I don't know the terminology. I don't know the concepts well enough, but Dr. Azar does, and his students do. And so collaborating with them, I think it's a great idea, because then we can put in the alternative text that's not just technically correct, but it also meets the learning goals of those lesson plans. Again, there's lots of resources on our AIM Center website and also on UDL on campus. But these are three that I typically highlight. Their WebAIM has a really excellent alternative text tutorial that walks you through the basics with some examples of how to create effective alternative text. The Web Accessibility Initiative also has an alt decision tree, so it guides you through some examples, and you get to ask, answer some questions, and it's like a flow chart for deciding what the best alternative text would be given a specific context. And then for more complex images, and this is the question that came up earlier, the Diagram Center has some image guidelines for things like charts and graphs or infographics, things that are a little bit more complex, that require more than alternative text. They actually require a long description separate from the image. All right, so I think that was the last practice. So I'm going to open it up. Maybe we have about 3 minutes, so maybe we could take a couple of questions here. But again, I'm available. We're going to share our contact information. So definitely reach out. We're here to help you through this difficult time. I see it as an opportunity as well for us to rethink how we make education more inclusive. So beyond this crisis, I want this to be a movement that going forward creates more inclusive learning environments. So I'll open it up for a couple of questions, but once again, here. Go ahead. No. Yeah, I just wanted to mention again, our website has a section, Designing for Accessibility with Poor. Yeah, but also, it's not in this slide set.
Sorry,
but,
Luis. No,
in
go ahead.
response to the current crisis, we actually have developed a one-stop webpage with a number of our resources. So it's a place where you can get, the essentials, if you will, to kind of get you started without getting overwhelmed. We try not to share too many links, but just the ones that we felt were the best place to start. So we'll see if we can drop that in the chat, or if you go to the AIM Center website, just look under About AIM, and it's clearly indicated as access or continuity of access resources.
I was thinking that since we are running a little late, maybe Mike can go ahead and open the survey, but we can keep talking while people take that survey. And you can also, when you get the slides, you'll have all our contact information. So you should be able to take a little survey that just tells us not only how useful you found the webinar today, but also if you have other topics you'd like to hear about. We really want to know what would be most helpful to you. Sam went ahead and put that link to the COVID-19 resources in the chat, and Mike just put the survey link. Luis, I think somebody did have a question. I want to go back here. Danette asked, even if something is decorative, it could be described. I feel like
Our
checking
response
decorative
generally
is
is to
akin to
begin
leaving
with
people
really
out. Can you talk a
questioning
little
whether
bit
that
about the
image
whole
is
decorative
necessary or
versus,
not.
you know,
Like, does it
what
add
things
to
you
the
should
content or
describe
not?
and what you shouldn't?
By purely decorative, I'm thinking, you know, a bar that you're using just to create some visual appeal, to separate things, or you know, something like that, where it really does not add to the content at all. It really, really is purely decorative. But for other images, you know, that's again a judgment call. So that's why, again, I say that you should have somebody else take a look at the image as well, and together you can come up most likely with a good rationale for whether the image should be described or not, and then good descriptive alt text if it's needed. But again, a lot of these are pretty simple accessibility practices. Others involve a little bit more judgment, if you will.
All right. All right. Well, thank you so much, Luis, and thanks to all of you for joining today. I hope everybody stays safe, and we're excited to have our next accessibility webinar, which will be coming up in April. You'll be getting more information about that. We'll continue to push the signups out, and you can also find that on the ATE Central site. AT Central, here I'll put in.
We are, Rachel, and
you can
thank
link
you
to that
Luis,
through our
to you,
slides
Luis, and Dr. Azar
as well
for
when you
joining
get them.
today.
But I think
And
we're done for
colleagues, just
today,
a
Mike.
reminder,
Yes?
you'll be automatically sent a link to the recording and the slides for today. Rachel and Luis, that officially ends our audio section of the webinar. I'll leave the system open for another minute or two so people can complete that survey, which on most machines opened in another browser window. Rachel, thank you again. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.